On the behavioral side, if you could just get on a whiteboard and write out, okay, so what are academic behaviors? What are behaviors in the res hall? And when I think about RAs, is that student, are they leaving their room? Are they alone? Are they spending too much, they're staying up too late playing Xbox, or what are those behaviors that happen? And then again, RDs know, okay, we're going to have those students. When that happens, what do we do so that we can hook them back into our community?
We have made it to another Tuesday. Thank goodness. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Phillips-Buck, VP for Student Success for Pharos Resources.
I'm Matt Boisvert, President of Pharos Resources. Thank you for joining us for Cap and Gown.
Absolutely.
This is our 18th episode.
I'm glad you're keeping track because I am finding it difficult.
It was almost exactly a year ago that we started our series with Anthony, and here we are with Cap and Gown.
Exciting. Well, thank you guys for joining us. It's always nice to look out and see my friends. And know that we are in summer right now, although I'm hearing from everybody like, hey, it feels like summer's already over, which please do not say that. I cannot handle it. We got too much stuff going on as we are thinking about the fall. And also, hopefully, you guys are getting some rest and relaxation this summer.
Hey, it's a busy week. You've got a lot going on, Rachel. So NASPA is going on.
Yes, I have a NASPA session this afternoon about upstream thinking. So that will be really fun. I did an all-day training with the school yesterday, which is always energizing to hear all of the ideas. And then you and I have a trip this week. And so there's a lot of stuff going on. You guys don't forget that you can get connected with us if you're listening to us on podcast. Thank you for joining us. We have a lot of different resources for you. taplink.cc/Pharos Resources to be able to connect with us, to join us on Zoom and to watch our YouTube videos. A lot of great resources. I'm joking a little bit. Hold on one second.
So today we're talking about predicted interventions. And this is a term we just kind of made up going back at least 8 years ago. We started using that, and it comes out of different processes that you crafted, where we'll talk about building an intervention that we could predict is going to be needed, because there are students who we know year after year will be struggling with a specific thing that we could help.
Yeah, for sure. So let me give you our roadmap for today. I'm going to do the State of the Union as we always do. We're going to talk about this perspective of success stat, which I know you all have heard me talk about before in some ways, but it's really core to this idea of predicted interventions. I'm going to give you the way that I came up with this idea by talking through my PathLIGHT program. And then we will talk about the elements of predicted interventions and then do some really specific case studies. And you all know I usually like to end with action items, but these case studies are actually going to serve as our action items for today as you're thinking through your different cohorts of students that you might want to manage. So let me do the State of the Union first.
Okay.
Okay. This is just a fact today coming out of Daily Mail. 1 in 5 young Americans are neither working nor studying because of COVID job losses. So a fifth of Americans aged between 20 and 24, which is about 3.8 million people, are neither working nor studying.
Wow.
Which is a 24% increase, about 740,000 people from the prior year. So we know we're in a pandemic and there's a lot of stuff going on, but it is really interesting to think about historically these sort of two channels that students have picked. Either they're studying for something or they have a job, and you have, 740,000 people who are doing neither.
They're sitting out right now.
Yeah, and I'm really curious what that looks like and what they're doing, and what we've talked before about when you break your lockstep, then you can start a business or you can pursue something else. And so I'm really curious what those students are doing.
Well, I would say for our schools, if they have an enrollment challenge right now. Things aren't looking great for the incoming year. There's 20% of those students that are still sitting out.
And to be clear, I mean, some of them are, I don't know, 24 is not necessarily considered non-traditional, but they're not our typical 18-year-old freshmen that you might normally be recruiting. So it is a little bit different of a population that you could pursue. Okay, this next one I love. So Arkansas Baptist made an unusual announcement last week about the coming fall semester. It's going to be free, which is amazing. Tuition, room, and board are going to be covered for the first 500 students. But the enrollment at this private historically Black college in the spring was 361 students. So they're betting that they can cover all of the students who are going to apply. All freshmen have to do to qualify is they have to do the admission process. They have to fill out the FAFSA, and there's no essay. There's no minimum grade requirement, nothing. It's covered. It's going to cost about $2.5 million. What's really interesting about this, you guys, is that the largest source of dollars is federal. So $1.35 million coming in COVID relief, which is tricky because that means it's not going to be there forever. And then they also got $1 million appropriation from the state, and then students are applying for the Pell Grant as well. So I will be really curious to see what happens after this one free semester is up. There are some kind of critics who are saying, how are you going to continue that kind of aid if you're not careful to work with families to make sure that they can realistically afford the cost over their academic career? You may have some difficulty with students, yes, enrolling, but then not being able to retain and graduate. So it's a pretty interesting perspective on what's happening in the market with tuition, and I think directly related to COVID events.
Well, I think it's related to the article you first referenced. So think about, how do we move some people who are not choosing to work or go to college? This is an opportunity. I love Arkansas Baptist College. Years ago, we met with a couple of people from there. And one thing that really impressed me at the time, their president, Dr. Fitzhill, was saying, hey, I want to go to the 10 most dangerous cities in America and recruit the students, those who aren't getting athletic scholarships, but want to change their life and go to college. And so they're really active in recruiting from those dangerous cities and changing lives. And I mean, a lot of great practices there. So really hopeful that this helps them with their incoming class and also to inspire and keep those students.
Yeah, for sure. I think this article says that students from that school graduate with about $25,000 worth of debt, which is way less than the national average, but also a significant amount. So being able to alleviate that even just for one semester where you don't have to worry about the cost, I think is an interesting perspective.
That's great.
Okay, and then related, tuition gamble that is paying off. So I don't know if you remember this, Matt, St. John College.
You love St. John College.
I do love St. John College. This is the reading college, the great
big
books.
reading list.
Yeah. Which I have attempted to start several times and have not. Maybe, I just had a birthday. Maybe this is the time when I'm like, hey, I need to get on the St. John's reading program.
It's summer. Why not?
Possibilities.
Yeah.
Okay. They took a counterintuitive but calculated risk 3 years ago when they decided to slash the cost of tuition and instead rely on donors to replace the lost revenue. Some people consider this reckless, others dismissed it as a public relations stunt, but today St. John's is one step closer to meeting the $300 million fundraising goal.
Wow.
It's an essential piece of the tuition reset plan. When the college administrators announced in 2018 that tuition was being slashed by $17,000, that's amazing.
That's a lot.
From $52,000 to now $35,000, it said it would make up for lost revenue by raising $300 million over 5 years. They announced earlier this month they had banked another $50 million from donors and secured a $50 million matching grant from a foundation. Since launching this 5-year fundraising campaign in 2018, they've raised $245 million.
I think that's crazy. Really great, especially when you consider the impact of COVID and how, as far as paying off for those students to have that discount, that reset in tuition is great.
Yeah, I love it. What's really interesting is they're saying it's a boon for enrollment. So they had 1,472 applications this spring, more than they've ever received before. They've accepted 893 students. So really remarkable.
Says
It's
a lot
good
about
value.
who they are. I mean, they know their promise. They know who they are.
And your son got a letter from them, right?
And it was a great one.
It's such a great, like, hey, we're not for everyone, but if we're for you, then you're gonna love it here.
It's a great letter.
It's great. Yeah. Okay, and lastly, we talked about this last week. The NCAA is kind of moving some things aside so that students can promote themselves and be profitable in their sport. And so we're already seeing this as college athletes have unveiled plans for personal logos, clothing lines, and other endeavors. So these college students are like, we were just waiting for this. So here is Graham Mertz, the quarterback for the University of Wisconsin. This is his new logo, personal logo, number 5, but you can see the GM in there. He tweeted this, and then somebody tweeted, hey, you better be careful because this Guerrilla Games, like, this is their logo and they might be unhappy with you. But I think they're different enough.
I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah. Okay. But it's really interesting to see how that is going to change things for our college students, and the not only lessening of the restrictions of what they can receive, like we talked about last week about music and about getting paid for jobs, but then also that they become their own personal brand, which, Matt, you and I have said before, like, everybody should think of themselves as a personal brand. So it's crazy to be restricted from being able to use your likeness, your abilities, your name to profit, right?
So, yeah, I like where it's headed with the name, image, and likeness, sticking with the person and for them to be able to manage their own brand. I do think I was reading, there's a question about this. So NCAA is wanting to protect the amateur status of their athletes. And so that's a part of it.
Yeah. Lisa's asking what Anthony would have to say about that. And I bet he would have a lot to say about it because he believes so much in personal brand. That he would be like, yeah, that's how you build your successful life, is you have a good reputation and you leverage that. So if I can remember when we meet with him next week, I'll bring that up. I'm sure he would like to weigh in on that.
All right. Hey, Rachel.
Yes.
I'm just going to jump in. I've got some questions for you.
Oh.
Because no one ever asked you a question.
Oh, dear.
I mean, about you.
We're doing 20 questions, but you only have 2?
We'll do 4.
Oh, okay.
All right. So what is your favorite time of day? Morning?
Oh, night.
Oh, okay.
Night.
Yeah. Would you pick the beach or the mountains if you had to go a place?
Ooh. This is why people don't ask me, because I'm an introvert. So I have to think about it for a long time before I can tell you. I really like the beach, but my childhood happy place is in the mountains. So there is something very healing and wonderful about the mountains to me.
Okay. What is your favorite breakfast?
A New York bagel with lox and cream cheese.
And your favorite dessert?
That's a hard one. I'm not really a dessert person, but I'm going to go with apple pie. I love pie. I like a good pie.
That's good. 4th of July coming up. Get some apple pie.
There you go.
Also, this is your 5th question. I'll just add one to it. What was the very best job interview you ever had?
Matt's trying to get me to say it was him. It was. He'd give me the best job interview I ever had.
All right.
Okay, there you go. Okay, so let's dive in. We are going to talk about success debt first. And I think this is important because predictive interventions come out of the idea that you have students, even if they're not first generation students. Like, in general, students are coming to college and they don't know what they're doing. They've never done it before. So there's all these like transitions and they're trying to figure out what to do and they're trying to, but they don't have the expertise that they need to know what to pursue, whether or not they're being successful, whether or not they're setting up their behaviors in the right way. And the root of predictive interventions is that we actually have expertise that we can leverage to identify things about students. So even before they know they're in trouble, we can be like, hey, we're worried about you. So do you want to talk about just like risky behaviors and non-cognitive and all of those sorts of things that we can identify?
first off, just thinking about it in terms of, as we've talked about, success debt. What are those things that add on to additional challenges for a student to be successful at your institution? And when you just look at some of those early behaviors, I think one of the first things that we would say is, did they attend orientation, right? So we're looking for what are those things that we know if a student's not participating in this, it would be an indicator of there's a reason why we designed orientation. We crafted that because we wanted to help students make that transition, have a week to meet people, transition into a college setting, learn some of the ropes about all of the things that they need to know and where to go. And so if you think about all the things that you've designed, not only orientation, but in your first year experience and throughout college path, then, okay, what are these different places where students can kind of hit a barrier and have some challenges? And so you have all of that expertise as you see that year after year, and you start to know, like, we know this is a place where a student's going to feel overwhelmed or feel anxiety about that process, or need just additional guidance through the process.
So I like that as it relates to success debt, because the thing is, if you have, let's say you have a 3-day welcome week event, right? And the student is not engaged in the first day. Well, if we can find them immediately, because we have touch point relationships and we have people who are looking for them, and then somebody goes and is like, hey, I mean, this happened for me. Like, I was terrible at welcome week, but I missed the first day, and my energy leader came and found me and was like, hey, we're going to dinner tonight. Please come with us, right? So I don't have the opportunity to accumulate success debt over 3 days, because immediately somebody came and said, hey, you're not joining in with us. We want you to come be with us. Versus the first day, nobody checks on me. The second day, nobody checks on me. The third day, nobody says anything to me about it. Not only have I not been invited into the community, I've missed everything that's happened in orientation. Yeah. So when I go to class the first day in my U100 class and everybody knows each other, I'm already in trouble. I'm already at least 3 days in debt because I didn't do those things, and nobody found me and nobody helped me, right?
And it's really hard to process. So if you think, so you start class, but you miss these 3 days, trying to recover those 3 days and learn the first week of class, keeping up with your syllabus. I could just imagine, Rachel, this might be a place where you're thinking, I probably should be writing down the assignments.
For sure. So leveraging that expertise, we talk all the time about our stoplight survey. The reason we built it the way that we did is because you guys know, in the 12th week, when a student's failed here's a true story. I told you I was not a great college student. Yeah. I was in a history class where I think I went twice. Okay. We're about to have finals. I go to the faculty member and I'm like, hey, is there anything I can do? I just don't want to fail your class, which, let's talk about the audacity of that first. And then he was like, what makes you think you're not failing your class? And I'm like, my class. And I'm like, well, of course I can recover. Like, I realize I haven't taken any of your tests and I've never gone to your class, but I can recover, right? This is what students think. Like, there's always a chance that we can just get extra credit, or we can just, whatever. Whereas faculty are like, hey, if you don't come to the class and you don't take the test, even before the midterm, I know that we're going to have some trouble. Like, you're already struggling. And so faculty are just so much better at identifying both students who are likely to struggle and students who are going to be successful in their class. So leveraging that expertise really early, so we don't have students that then are just so overburdened that they can't pass their class, which, for the record, I did pass my history class.
You did?
I did, because he was like, hey, you can come in and take all the tests, and if you pass them, I'll pass you. So I did. Which was not helpful for my student development at all. Okay, so I want to talk about how we came to predictive interventions. And I want you guys to be thinking about, I know you have programs like this on your campus, and I want to lead you through this. And I would love for you to chat to me the things as I'm telling you this process, where you're like, oh, that's a place where we could leverage our predicted interventions. And then Matt and I are going to go through the actual elements of that so that we can practice it. But This idea came about because I was hired as a career counselor at Abilene Christian University. And the first sort of iteration of the way we were trying to help students with career exploration was that there was a class embedded in a U100 course that faculty taught. So these are random faculty who don't know a lot about career. They don't know a lot about the assessments that they're giving. Nothing. It's just one of the things that you have to talk about in your class is major and career. So when I came in, I was like, this is really uneven and it's not being delivered by experts. How can we change this? So there's something, but it's not real, basically. So then I was like, hey, I know it's embedded in the courses, but can I deliver it? Will you have me come in so I can do a workshop for you so that you don't even have to worry about that? Just tell me in the syllabus where it is. I will come in and I will do a workshop. And so I think I was doing 50 U100 classes in a semester. Like, okay, now I'm going to go talk to this one. Now I'm going to go talk to this one now. And it's the same speech and it's the same everything. The students really liked it. It was helpful because I was in control of it. But it's really crazy town to be giving the exact same thing to different groups of students 50 times. I had it down like a script, sure, right? Yeah. So then I'm like, but maybe it's a better idea to have individual meetings. So then when I would go to these U100 classes, I would say, if you're unsure about your major or if you have questions, please come and see me. And my schedule would get super filled up because we know freshmen, a lot of them haven't picked their major. But even if they have, we don't know if that's real, if they just picked it, or if there's some actual something behind it, right? So my schedule got filled up with individual meetings. And I found that I was not giving the same speech in the U100 classes to everybody, but I was delivering pretty much the same message to every student I was talking to. I was talking to them about decision making. I was talking to them about their personality and what they're good at. I was talking to them about the world of work and how you do research on different jobs. Every single meeting I had, I was like, these are the 5 elements that we have to go through. And at the end of a week one day, I just was like, this does not make any sense. I actually know what these students need before they come in to see me. I have a whole toolkit that I can deploy to help them. And I'm going to leverage my expertise in this area. Instead of saying, what is it that you need? I'm going to tell them, hey, I think if you will walk through these 5 steps, some of them will be more useful to you than others, but I think if you'll walk through them, we'll end up in the place that we want to go. So that's when I started doing small classes for really interested groups of students and just saying, here are the 5 things we're going to cover. I'm going to do an individual meeting with you, but I'm going to have had in this classroom the experience of we're all going to talk about decision making. We're all going to talk about personality, those sorts of things. And that was an aha moment because what it means is it's not sustainable for me to meet one-on-one with every single student, especially if it's a cohort that has similar needs. Right. There's something really powerful about looking at other people in the same situation as you, especially when you're a freshman and you don't have a major. And you're like, oh my goodness, look at all these other people who don't have a major. This is totally normal, right? And that's the beginning of us saying, I'm pretty sure that for every cohort and every challenge, we can predict what that student would need, build that out so that then we can give it to them at exactly the right time.
So I love that because it's taking our student success funnel and working through. And so using that first step of we're going to identify, create that cohort who has the same need. We're going to batch the support for them. But the first thing is we're going to connect with them. So, Hey, we see you. Also, you should be connected with each other, because you're all going through this journey together. And then exactly as you described, you setting yourself up as the guide through that process for them, where you can say hey, it seems like this tends to come up more often right now. And so I'm going to bring some more resources to address this as a group. Or it seems like this class has higher anxiety around this decision. Maybe that was COVID affected, or, that there were some things that really affected everyone's thought process in this. So yeah, I love that.
So the caveat to that is, you guys will remember we talked last week about you do have to be present with the person in front of you. Don't assume that you know everything about them, but you're present with them in the context of this greater plan. I know in general students have difficulty in this area with these things. I absolutely going to listen to what the student says and say, oh, okay, well, this is a different case, or, oh, okay, that makes sense. Maybe we need to do things a little bit differently. But it is in the context of that expertise of like when students are on academic probation, I know generally this is the kind of intervention that they need. So I think that's helpful. So let's talk through predicted interventions. The first piece of that is thinking about your student cohorts. So student cohorts, the definition there is they're distinct from other cohorts. Different cohorts have different needs. They kind of exhibit common needs and circumstances within those individual cohorts. And because of that, it means that they respond similarly to different interventions. So we can target our interventions to those individual cohorts with the assumption that in general, they're going to respond to whatever the intervention is that we've crafted to try to help them with that particular issue. Matt, can you talk about the at-risk indicators?
So you mean how we can find these things? So if you think about, there's leading and lagging indicators, ways of identifying your students and building out these cohorts. And we've talked about in the past lots of different ways that you can do that. One is through our partnership with Macmillan and all of their iClicker surveys, being able to provide that student assessment, that's going to help you, whether it's they have a low sense of belonging in your community or they're feeling homesickness, distress. That's those two factors. If you were looking for anything to be able to, a group of students who could really use your help and build out predicted interventions, this is a great tool. So iClicker surveys, just listening to your students. I think also, as you, Rachel, talked about admissions, they're going to be very helpful in that process. They know, they just spent 9 months building relationships with this incoming class. Also related, you have students who are coming in, as we've talked about a couple of weeks ago, with transfer students. And there's a lot of challenges with your transfer population, and really they're left out in a lot of ways. They're not measured the way that an incoming first-time freshman cohort is. So I think that there's a lot that we can learn from incoming transfers. Predictive models are helpful, especially as you start clustering based on the factors, the reasons why these students were identified as higher risk for your incoming population. And then also work that we do with Spark or building out a high at-risk population. Of course, your institutional research group to be able to say, for our campus, these are pockets of students who don't retain or persist at the same rate as the average. And so really, Rachel, I think that was one thing that came out of your work with PathLIGHT and building out a career program, is that it was, at the time, it was the largest major on the campus, and it had one of the lower retention rates. And then as you were working with them, you actually increased the retention rate of that population above the school's average retention rate. And so that really stood out, where it's nice to come back in our funnel and being able to measure that. So there's a lot of ways that you can identify different cohorts based on. One thing that I would just say, when you look at, really easily, did this first generation student attend orientation? And I think we'll talk more about that, but specific factors like that, so there's a lot of information that you already have on your campus to identify.
And I think that every campus has these elements where you're saying, like, for our first year students, we have created predictive interventions, even if you're not calling it that, right? Where you say, like, we want to embed these pieces in orientation. We want to make sure we're doing these things in welcome week. We want to make sure that in their U100 classes, we're talking about these elements. So you have that. But if you think about it as an actual thing where you can say, here's a group of students who we've conditionally admitted, or here's a group of students who are coming back on academic recovery, or students who are deciding on their major, or whatever that cohort is that you can identify as a higher at risk, and then say, we can see before the student does what the challenges are. We can predict what those challenges are. And so we can create a specific support mechanism in those areas to target the challenges that we see coming down the pike. So if you think about first of all, as you're crafting those predicted interventions, they're very tied to time. So what is happening in the semester? What is going on in terms of academics? What are the deadlines? Like, do they need their room? Is it time for them to register for classes, right? Those kinds of timing elements are going to bring to the forefront some of those cohort identifiers for you. And then also, Matt, you were talking about just the rhythm of the academic year, specifically as we're thinking about the experience on the academic side of the house, which does have a very nice, predictable flow to it, right?
So just as we were talking about that first exam, and you have students on your campus who in the past, maybe they were great in high school and they have a shock factor of not doing well in their very first round of exams, or maybe one specific class that might have really affect their major. If you're able to, again, going back to your connection with faculty, if you're able to listen and find those students who are struggling right there, just to be able to normalize it and say, hey, we know it's not uncommon for you to have a bad exam, and there's a lot of ways to recover, and here's all of the support resources that we've built in to help you navigate that shock.
Yeah, I like that. I think about that a lot with our stoplight survey, where if you think about a freshman in their third week, they get a yellow, and faculty are saying, hey, I'm seeing signs of struggle here. And what we're finding in our schools is it doesn't have to be a heroic recovery. Sometimes it's just somebody saying like, hey, maybe you need to go to tutoring for this class. And then that's enough for them not to get so laden down with success debt that they can't recover. Somebody just giving this gentle prompt of like, hey, it's normal. There are things that we can do to be helpful to you. The other thing that I wanted to say about that is, as we're thinking about risk factors to help you identify cohorts to then intervene with in these predicted ways, remember that we have individual characteristics and then we have behavioral characteristics. So an individual characteristic would be like, this is a first generation student. This is a student who has high financial need. This is a student who isn't sure about their major. Those are things that oftentimes the way that we solve those problems is through connection. And so remember, with our student success funnel, we can't necessarily solve the fact that a student is a first generation student. The intervention that we want there, the predicted intervention, is a person to be close to that student so that when they have questions about what is office hours and how do I register and what should I do for my major, that person can then solve those specific issues. Because Matt, so many times, like when the retention intelligence side of the house at Pharos delivers this high at-risk population, there are individual factors that we can't change, right?
Sure.
Like, so you've given me this whole population of students and I'm like, I can't do anything about the fact that they have financial need and they're a first generation student. I cannot do anything about that. But what I can do is have a person close to them to then walk with them and talk that through with them and help them to be successful. And so you and I a lot of times get questions of like, well, if those are the things you're identifying, what are we supposed to do about that? Right? You got your funnel flipped.
Right. You're working on solve.
You're working on solve. And solve will come. There are small things that we can do. We can find grants. We can help students, decide on their major. There are things we can do. But if you're saying you gave me a heart population, I don't know how to solve those problems for them, you're not working your student success funnel. You've gotten kind of confused.
Facilitate connection. That's the first piece.
For sure. Okay. And then the other thing I was going to say, so we have those individual characteristics that there's not tons that we can do, but then also there's behavioral things. And those are places where we need to have touch point relationships to be able to say, hey, you have to go to class. Hey, if you're going to register for, or if you want your room assignment, you have to register for your classes first, right? So behavioral things that as a student is surrounded by this kind of individual care team, those people who are close and see the student will be able to say, you haven't introduced yourself to your faculty, you should do that. You didn't go to orientation, here's what you need to do. So sort of intrinsic characteristics and then behavioral characteristics that we have to pay attention to. And the behavioral ones are the ones that are going to be tied to the rhythm of the academic year.
I love that on the behavioral side, if you could just get on a whiteboard and write out, okay, so what are academic behaviors? What are behaviors in the res hall? And when I think about RAs, is that student, are they leaving their room? Are they alone? Are they spending too much, they're staying up too late playing Xbox, or what are those behaviors that happen? And then again, RDs know, okay, we're going to have those students. When that happens, what do we do so that we can hook them back into our community?
Yeah.
That's the foundation of predicted intervention.
For sure. So I want to walk through the 4 basic elements of predicted interventions. The very first one we've talked a lot about, which is the barrier. So what are we trying to solve? We do need to think about, okay, well, we have students who aren't connected. Okay, so that's what we're trying to figure out what to do about the fact that the student isn't connected. And then we want to think about what resources do we already have. So Matt, we talk to clients all the time who wear 75 different hats. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be, in fact, thinking of Lisa at Mars Hill, and very early with Early Alert. And she was like, I cannot have a whole nother population of students. I have so many students that I'm serving, right? Well, Lisa is a resource for that school. And so we don't have to create a new thing that she has to do. We just have to say, how do we use her as a resource and deploy her in the right strategic times and places, so that it's not like we need 7 other people. Although I know she wouldn't be sad about 7 other people, but what resources do you have and how do we align those for these strategic times? Because you were saying that there is this ebb and flow of resource use, right? Do you want to say more about that?
Yeah. So if you think about your, so just tied into the rhythm of the academic year, and there are some points, especially when school starts, that you're all in, and then you get into hopefully a few lulls.
Hopefully.
And so maybe you have one week where students are kind of in their place and they're in the groove, they're doing their thing. And normally that would be a time where they're not coming to see you. You're not having meetings with students all the time. But this could be a place where you can kind of level up your time for that predicted intervention. Maybe it's based on, and we saw that with our stoplight survey, that 3 weeks in, faculty are seeing, these are students who are not doing well in my class. And that was a good time for our partners to be able to engage those students. So just looking at where are some built in our 360, you can see in dashboards kind of time spent. Are there some natural times where students aren't from every angle coming to see you, and you can be very intentional about supporting a at-risk cohort?
Yeah, for sure. Another thing to think about, you've heard me talk a lot about communication. So how are we going to talk to our students in any predicted intervention? How are we going to tell them what we need them to do? How are we going to explain what we need them to do? How are we going to invite them to be part of our community? I'm always thinking about, so this is really funny, when I was doing PathLIGHT, I had no good reason for students to come other than it was helpful and I was likable. So there was no teeth. It's not like you're not going to be able to register, or I'm going to give you a grade, nothing. There was nothing. I brought M&Ms and they found it helpful, right? Well, when you're thinking about your communication for your predicted intervention, you have to understand what is your locus of control. In that case, I had no control. I had to sell it to my students hey, stick with me. I promise you this is going to be helpful to you. And at the end of every session, I would be like, was it helpful to you? Then I will see you next week, right? So thinking about, in some cases, like academic recovery, you actually do have the communication to say, you must come and see me. These are the things that you have to do. I'm still on your side. I'm going to work with you, but you have a little bit more leverage. And so for all of those predicted interventions, you either have to build teeth in where students are going to have to do the thing, or for orientation, if they didn't come to orientation, you're going to have to sell to them why they should come meet with you and why it's important and how it's going to benefit them. because if you don't have leverage, they won't do it. Right.
So Rachel, I was thinking about this in terms of, again, you being the guide. But a part of that is, so if you have the map, so as students are kind of facing barriers, they're challenged in different ways, but what they see you as, yes, you're a resource, and the communication to them is that you are the guide, and you actually have a way to help them navigate this thing that they're struggling with.
Which I think they're very, very hungry for. That's what I found was like, when I would say, hey, stick with me and we're going to get where we need to go, they'd be like, okay, I believe you. So
yeah. What's really fun about that also is that they start to tell their friends.
Yeah. So. Right. Yeah, for sure. Okay. And then the last element. So we have the barriers, the resources you have, how you're communicating what you're doing, and then also your follow-up. So we're going to do this thing, but then here's how we're going to check in with you. Here's the next thing we're going to do. Here's how we're going to measure what we did. Here's how we're going to know whether or not we were successful. So those are those 4 elements. And what's really nice is that for any of those interventions or any of those cohorts, sorry, I got distracted because Lisa's asking me a connection question. And that is always, I'm always like, yes, connection. What now? So she's saying there's a gap in connection with students. How do we get students to come and see you? I wonder, Lisa, if in the February or in the fall, it's going to resolve itself because people will be a little bit more back to normal and will be so hungry for that. I think people are still a little bit anxious and we don't have all of the opportunities to be able to spend with our students, but I'm really curious to see if in the fall we're going to just see like a revival of students wanting to come and be with you, or if it's going to be like we talked about the other day where we have to figure out how to help them practice that and say like, hey, I know it's hard, you've been out of practice, but I really want you to come and see me. So do you have something to add?
Well, I think there will be a hunger for connection, but you have to be the ones who create those opportunities for them, like built-in ways for them to meet you and see you. I love some of the conversations that we've had with schools where they've talked about, we're going to be very intentional about eating together in the cafeteria. We want students to see us and make that accessible for our students.
Hey, I am missing students.
Yeah.
I think everybody is missing students. It's just been, I mean, we talk about it a lot from a student perspective, but I think for, people in higher ed, it's just a beat down to go to these jobs every day without that life-giving student engagement, so. Okay, so as you think through any of those cohorts, I'm going to show you this. Matt hates this slide because it's really messy. And for those of you who are joining us from the podcast, I'm going to do my best to try to explain to you what this is showing here. But really, from left to right, what you'll see is that you have a cohort challenge. This is an applicant with a weak academic history. When are we going to identify them? We can find them before orientation. Who is going to find them? Admissions is going to tell us before orientation that this is a student that may be academically underqualified. If that's the case, then here's what we're going to do for them. They're going to enroll in the learning strategies class. They're going to have weekly meetings and a mentor meeting. We're going to talk about the content. We're going to talk about study skills, time management, campus resources, registering for classes. The follow-up is going to be if the student is below a C at midterm, then additional meetings are going to be added to that student. So you can look at all of these as examples. We think about new students who will miss all or part of orientation. How will we know that? That will be in the first week of school. The director of FYE will give us the list. In Pharos 360, we're going to open a student for all of those students under the care area first year experience orientation. And then each of those students have to meet with their advisor before they start classes. The advisor is going to assess why they missed orientation and either say, oh, your mother got sick, I totally understand it, case resolved. Or they're going to use specific interventions. Like it sounds like you probably should go talk to the financial aid office, or can we talk about what it means to register for classes, or whatever those interventions are. We'll talk about overview of the campus, review of student services, financial aid reviews. We'll give you the map. In midterm, we're going to check in with you and just say, hey, how's it going? Right? So does that make this a little better? This slide?
Just hearing you talk through it, that was great. I do think, again, going back to early indicators, what are some of those leading indicators? And then early on behavioral indicators of risk. That sets up your cohort challenge. Then then, as Rachel just walked through, the ability to then start mapping out, okay, so when does this happen? How am I going to hear about it? What is our plan? Who do we connect them with? I think, again, when I look at this, what you're doing is you, again, are bringing our student success funnel to life. And really, this is a way of bringing that into an operational process. So,
and I think where this most often occurs, if you're like, I don't know where this is, where I would necessarily be able to articulate this on our campus, I think it so often occurs for academic probation students. So usually you have a pretty clear, maybe not necessarily good, but a pretty clear plan of here's when we're going to know, and then they're going to appeal, and then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this. So we'll talk more about that. But that would be a place, as you're looking for predicted interventions on your campus, that's one where I suspect it probably exists.
So Rachel, one that I was thinking about, just looking at this, that I don't know that we've talked about is, so for a number of people who have joined us today, they have a large athlete population on their campus. And in some cases, the student is surprised to find out they're not going to be the starter. And they might be several, third string maybe for whatever sport. And so we've in the past, we've talked about that unanchoring, whether it's that the student athlete decides, I really don't want to be on the team if I'm not going to be starting. They personally will unanchor, or the coach will say, this student athlete just isn't going to make it, isn't going to make the team. And so that's one of those cohorts that I would want to build this out for. So what happens when that occurs?
How are we going to find them? What is the plan? What are we going to do? Yeah, for sure. I agree with you. We've said that about athletes, but also about those majors that have very, very tight cohorts, nursing, theater, some of those other cohorts where it's like, if you can't be successful in the class and you have to change your major, it feels pretty catastrophic. So how are we going to find those students and have a conversation with them about, hey, I know this feels overwhelming, but we have a plan where we can help you find a new place here. So what happens when you do those predicted interventions is you would not only have a list like the last one we showed you where it shows all of the cohorts, but then you would be able to tie that to time of intervention. So you would have a catalog where you would say, okay, our 2 summer predicted interventions that we're doing are going to be for our cohort that has a weak academic history and then our non-academic risk students. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to be having a phone call with them. We're going to be talking about this. We're going to invite them a couple of days early to do an intensive study skills class. We're going to offer them a college class for free to make sure that they don't have 0 college credit hours. You want to talk more about that idea?
So as we've talked about, your first time freshman population that's coming in with no dual credit or AP credit, those are a high risk population across all of our schools. We see that as a factor. And it seems like for a lot of our schools, there's a growing population of students who come in without those credit hours. So they don't have the academic rigor of college. They haven't experienced that yet, especially when you think about the layer of COVID. So what happened so for these students, what happened the spring of their junior year and then all of their senior year, if they were online, and a lot of the challenges that went with that. And now they're coming in without any transfer credits. That's a high at-risk population.
And we've seen schools that are saying like, we'll scholarship 1 college class if you will come early, because we're going to help you in that transition to getting used to college and figuring out what that workload is like and all of that kind of stuff, right? So that's a great predictive intervention.
And some schools are really building out great, strong, early kind of early fall or pre-fall single course for that student to be able to
with
participate.
Your rockstar faculty and Okay, so you could have your timing where you'd be like, in summer, here's what we're doing. Then after orientation, we're going to be looking for transition issues. In the first week, we're going to be addressing all of our academic recovery, our probation issues. And so you would have this long list of, this is how at these strategic times, we're going to run these interventions. So I really love that idea that we would be ordering our work based on where students are. And Matt, you were talking earlier about this idea of being sensitive to their emotional response? Like, where are the places where they're going to be stressed? Right? Can you say more about that?
Well, it's always amazing when you just blueprint out a process that you're asking student to be involved in. And so maybe that's registering for classes. We've started to build a real practice around not yet registered. So one of those earlier comments we said, just interview your students, you start to learn a lot of things about why they're not registered for classes. There's a whole lot of things that they're trying to manage. And in that process of just registering for classes, maybe they have a financial hold, and that adds anxiety when they find out they have that, or they're losing their scholarship because they didn't do as well as they had hoped in their first semester. If you're able to look at what are places where a student will feel more anxiety, those are the places we can come alongside them and as we've talked about, make them feel better about this isn't just you. This doesn't mean that you're a failure in college. This happens. And we have resources for you in that when you're in that moment. So,
which, side note, you and I have been talking a lot about this new feature that we built into 360, which is the ability to see every time a student opens an email.
Oh, it's amazing.
We are shocked because the sort of conventional wisdom has been that students are not opening their emails. You guys, they're opening them 50 times. So what we're finding is that they're not responding because you want to talk about a place of high anxiety and stress. You've sent them an email and they're looking at it every single morning at 6:00 and then not responding and not doing what you want them to do. And so that's a place where I was just talking to the school I was talking to yesterday. I was saying, when you identify that a student is looking at your email over and over, they're stuck, they feel frozen. And so you have to give them a smaller, more manageable thing to do. Like, hey, just respond with yes, and we'll set up our appointment or whatever, right?
Move them out of paralysis.
Yeah, we all have that experience where it's like, I know, but there are so many things I have to do in order to respond to this email. And so I've been really, really, really surprised that students are reading their emails. They just aren't responding to them. So there's a little nugget of truth for you today. Yeah. Okay, the last thing that I want to say about predicted interventions, and then Matt, maybe we can talk through either the not enrolled or the academic recovery, either one that you want to. But the last thing I'll say is that as I keep reminding us, people are individuals. And so you have heard me say, especially over the last couple of weeks, the inability to listen to what's actually happening with the student and just say like, oh, you're on academic probation, so you need study skills, right? Is very detrimental and not a good connection to that student. You need to be present with them. So one thing that I really love when there is a variety of reasons a student might be struggling is that instead of having a predicted intervention set, when this happens, we will do these things, is that you actually have a catalog of interventions that you can choose from to give a student the best and most helpful experiences. So here, if our student is still deciding on their major, it might be that they actually know what they want to do, but their parents won't let them be an art major, right? So in that case, study skills or doing research is not going to help them. We've got to talk about career thought inventory, about how you make decisions and are you free to make the decisions that you want to, right? That's where I need to address it. So I'm going to give them that inventory. I might have a student who's like, I don't even know what jobs there are. I'm a first generation college student. I know a lot of jobs that don't require a college degree, but I don't know what they are. Okay, then we need to do some college research about, or some job research about what's out there and what might be interesting to you. The saddest one to me was always when I would say to a student, hey, tell me what you're good at. And they would be like, I have no idea. Has no one ever said to you, hey, you're really good at? No, they haven't. Okay, then we're going to use from this catalog some personality assessments and strong interest inventory to help you understand better who you are. So making the assumption that it's like these 5 things are going to solve all the problems is really detrimental. And having an intervention catalog where you're like, here's all of the tools in my toolkit. I'm going to deploy these depending on what I find out from the student, I think can be really helpful.
So again, on the whiteboard, as I'm mapping out, I'm looking at these are behavior-based things, that different triggers where I want to create a cohort based on these things underneath that. So when that happens, what are creative ways that I can engage that student? And because for Rachel, the introvert, it's going to be very different than Shauna, the extrovert volleyball player, right? Yeah, and so being able to list those different, what are the different tools that I have? Maybe I don't have all the tools, but I've got a great campus partner who can help me add to the list.
Okay, so our action item is about not enrolled, right?
Yeah, so just talking through the not enrolled population, because this is going to come up. It's kind of a lagging indicator of they haven't committed to come back either for the spring or the next fall. So we know this is a group of students who is going to directly impact your persistence and your retention and your graduation rate. So what do we do about that group of students who at maybe in the fall, we're looking at somewhere around November, where we have maybe 3 weeks left to engage them, and they have not yet registered.
And now they're at home. And so now there's even more urgency. We were just talking to a school the other day, and they're like, we have 130 students that are not with us anymore, but we've got to figure out how to engage them this summer so that they'll come back right in the fall. So figuring out how you identify that cohort, and then what are those connections, call campaigns, getting admissions involved. If they have been connected to their advisor, how do we deploy their advisor? You had something.
Well, yeah, no, I would break it out in terms of, okay, so we know that it's large. We have 130 students, but some of those are financial need. They need academic recovery.
Yeah.
How are we going to help them with academic recovery in this? Or they're just they didn't feel like they connected, and you have resources to help them see that this is the right community for them. So I think there's at least those 3 buckets where social, you have the financial, and then you have academic, and just, again, building out a catalog of interventions for those students could be really helpful for them. And what you're always talking about this, Rachel, is they see you then. You're saying, I see you, and you belong here. We want to be helpful.
What can we do to help you? Yeah, for sure. I think that is a great place. If you're looking for something to do, that is a great place to be spending your energy and your effort right now, because you do have a lot of students that are in flux, and that sort of invitation back into the community and also solving those specific problems, I think, will be really helpful.
This summer, you can do something really remarkable with that population of students who have not yet registered.
Yeah.
And that's not just your freshmen. Again, as we've talked about, we have sophomores who have really struggled this last year. Their freshman year was very hard. They're coming back into hopefully their sophomore year all the way through. And so the attention on those students who have not yet registered and breaking them out into their unique needs can make a huge impact.
For sure. All right. Well, that's predicted interventions. I'm glad you guys could join us. We're happy to talk more about that with you individually if you're interested. Next week, we have Anthony with us. And so we will be, I think we're about done with Kintsugi. I think we're at the place where I think we're putting the gold on next week. So that will be really fun. And then the week after, we I forget what our topic is the week after, but it will be really, really good. I promise.